Star Wars 7 by 7 episode 2368. All right, we're going to swing back to some news that we haven't talked about yet, and this is going to go back to the Disney Investor Day and the Lando series. Here's what little we know about it so far and what the biggest questions are going into 2021. Punch it. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7 by 7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So the Lando series was officially announced at the Disney Investor Day. This was earlier this month, around December 10th, I think it was. This is what Kathleen Kennedy said at the time. Here is her quote from the Disney Investor Day.
Lando Calrissian is the galaxy's smoothest, most notorious scoundrel, and he'll return in a brand new event series for Disney+. Justin Simien, creator of the critically acclaimed and hugely popular Dear White People, is developing the story with us now. A massive Star Wars fan himself, Justin has put together a reel to give you a sense of the style, tone, and irresistible swagger of our upcoming series, Lando. Take a look.
There you go, Kathleen Kennedy talking about the Lando series, and the footage to which she refers and that they cut to was only shown to investors. It was not shown to the general public. The reports that have surfaced online about it say that it was just sizzle reel type footage of existing stuff. It wasn't anything that was new. The only thing that was new was the confirmation of the series and that it would be called Lando. And of course that Justin Simien is the guy who's working on it. So that is what we know, and that's not a lot. Obviously, we know that this had been rumored, or something in the Solo verse, if you will, had been rumored for some time, but we didn't know what it was going to be, who it was going to be, any of that. And so that leads us to what the biggest questions are about this series. And seeing as how I've mentioned the who, we might as well start with the who. Who is actually going to be in this series? In particular, is this going to be Donald Glover? Is this going to be Billy Dee Williams? Is it going to be both of them? Is it going to be neither of them? And it did strike me as odd that they didn't announce who would be playing Lando, or that one of those two actors was attached to play Lando for this. And I got to thinking about that in terms of animated series versus live action. If this were an animated series, which it's not, it's live action, then you would think there's a possibility they would cast somebody else entirely to do the voice of Lando, and so it wouldn't really be news in that regard, and so you wouldn't necessarily think it rose to the level of mentioning it during the announcement of the series' existence itself for the Investor Day. Ultimately, what that leads me to believe is that they have cast either Donald Glover or Billy Dee Williams, or both of them, and they're just saving that for a later announcement. I would love the idea of them doing this like the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles instead as the Calrissian Chronicles, and you have segments at the beginning where old Lando, Billy Dee, is dictating his memoirs, and then you get to see it play out with Donald Glover as young Lando. I think that would be fantastic, but at this point we don't know for sure, and Disney, Lucasfilm, they are not telling us whether one or the other or both are attached, so we'll just have to wait to get that word. But I gotta say, I can't imagine they would have announced a live action series without knowing who was going to be starring in it. The second big question is, when in the timeline is this going to take place? So that, of course, kind of depends on who is cast for this. Let's go out on a limb and say it's Donald Glover, okay? Because that seems to open up more possibilities for action and excitement. Nothing against Billy Dee Williams. Billy Dee Williams is of a more advanced age, and so action and excitement is not necessarily going to be in his bailiwick anymore, and that's okay. That's just the way life rolls. So let's roll with Donald Glover, because that opens up a lot more creative and action-oriented possibilities. And when you do that, the more focused question about the timeline becomes, is it going to take place before Solo or after Solo? Certainly there is an attraction to the pre-Solo idea, because then you can also bring back Phoebe Waller-Bridge as L3, and that creates a lot of great possibilities. Certainly they have demonstrated they're willing to do that sort of thing with the Cassian Andor series, which is going back obviously before he died, and is bringing back K2SO. And so yeah, that does make some narrative sense. There is also an argument to be made for going after Solo, because then you have Lando starting at a rather low point, having just lost the Millennium Falcon, and what does he do from there? What are his next adventures? And there are other compelling reasons, I think, to suggest that it take place afterward, and that it may in fact take place afterward, which are also tied into a couple of the other big questions. Number one, for the other tied in questions, the third big question overall is, will this cross over with other series? The reason why I feel like this is a big question to consider, number one, is because we just got the announcement for the Obi-Wan Kenobi series that it is taking place 10 years after the events of Revenge of the Sith. That's a change from what it had been. Previously, it had been scheduled to take place 8 years after the events of Revenge of the Sith, and so they moved it 2 years ahead in the timeline, and that means that it's happening also after the events of Solo: A Star Wars Story. And so if you were to bring Lando into this space, then you could possibly have him interact with Obi-Wan Kenobi on one of Kenobi's rollicking adventures, as they describe it. And that actually leads me to the fourth and final big question, which is, what the heck is an event series? And that question becomes important because the Obi-Wan Kenobi series is described as a limited series. Initially, they talked about it being a 6-episode run, and now it's rumored that it's only a 4-episode run, but that hasn't actually been confirmed as far as I know. So an event series versus a limited series, there is not a standard definition of this that exists. If you look at, say, for example, the Emmy Award categories, there's not a separate category for an event series versus a limited series. I did a few searches to see, what people say about it. There are things about television executives joking and saying, oh, what are the Emmy categories? Or we don't even know. We're still trying to figure this out. Or, we're just making stuff up to not call it a miniseries, because the idea of a miniseries used to be associated with melodramatic things like, say, the Thornbirds, for example, those kind of, very romantic and epic scale melodramatic romantic miniseries, and they wanted to get away from that particular notion. Networks did, and so they are trying to come up with these new ideas. And so a limited series, it seems like the sort of agreed upon definition is that it is a shorter season compared to the regular season of television, and it tells a complete story arc, whereas an event series seems to be described as not too different, but one that is supposed to garner more attention, that it's a bigger deal than your average limited series. So calling the Lando series an event series is a little bit intriguing in that way, because it hasn't even started and it doesn't attach to anything. It's not something that's been led up to or anything like that. So why would you call it an event series? And the only thing that really seems to make sense to me is that if you thought about, like, say, for example, the climactic story event that Kathleen Kennedy referred to when she talked about how Ahsoka and Rangers of the New Republic and other shows like the Book of Boba Fett and presumably The Mandalorian as well would build up to a climactic story event, well, you kind of have to run it backwards, basically. And if Lando isn't being built up to as an event, then the opposite could well be true, which is that it's an event that's kicking something off. And that's the reason why I think the Lando series is going to take place after the events of Solo: A Star Wars Story, and why there will potentially be crossovers as well, because I think that this is just going to be the start of a larger storytelling enterprise. We have a Mandoverse right now, and I think this could be the start of a Scoundrelverse, if you will. So I'm just going to go ahead and coin the term now, so that way I can say a year from now how prescient I was. That's fun. But I do really think that that is the case. It seems to make sense in terms of just looking at the logic of what's been presented to us and the way that Lucasfilm has talked about their storytelling situation right now. It seems like if you're going to call something an event series and nothing has led into it or up to it, then the opposite must be true, that it's supposed to be kicking off something larger scale. And that opens the door to a lot of other characters returning, including Maul, of course, because heaven knows Lucasfilm can't get enough of Maul. Also Kira, also Han and Chewie. This opens the door potentially to that whole Make Solo 2 Happen movement that has been brewing, that was started by the folks at Star Wars Newsnet. So if you've been holding out hope for that, well, this Lando series being billed and marketed as an event series, that seems like a rather hopeful sign for that kind of possibility. And that's just about everything I have for you on the show today. I have one other note, which is to say thank you to Camila Valenzuela and Ryan O'Loughlin. They are the two latest patrons to support Star Wars 7x7. Ryan, Camila, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Thank you so very much for this vote of confidence, this vote of support for me and Star Wars 7x7 and the efforts to bring this daily dose of Star Wars joy out to the world. The moral support factor of it is just as important, if not more so. I obviously have a lot of motivation to do this show. I've been doing it for nearly 6.5 years now on a daily basis, but every little bit helps, from the financial side to the emotional side and everything in between. So thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you so much, Camila. And thank you so much to everyone who supports the show currently and who has supported the show in the past as well. And if you're listening to the show and you are not a patron, that's okay. I'm still doing the show regardless, right? So whether you can and you're not, or you can't and you're not, that's perfectly okay. But if you are able and you think it is worth your time to support a creative endeavor like this that has been going on multiple hours a day in terms of the research and creation and publication and delivery of it for so many years, then I hope you'll consider checking out patreon.com/SW7x7 to see what's going on over there. And thank you very much for considering it. So that is going to do it for the show today. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always. And may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2020 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.